The summer of 1911 was turning out to be a busy time for Robert and Lizzie Scott. Their farm, located a few miles south of modern-day Mebane, North Carolina, was beautiful and prosperous. Their butter was so sought after, they sold all that they made and purchased butter for the household from a neighboring farm. Robert was well known throughout North Carolina, not only for his public service in the State House and Senate, but also for his many talks and speeches in support of modern agricultural practices. June brought the wedding of their daughter Josephine to Cassius Rex Hudson, a pioneer in the Agricultural Extension Service. In July, the Scotts hosted the annual picnic for members of Hawfield's Presbyterian Church. And in August, Robert and Lizzie welcomed their 14th child, a boy, into the world. It would be safe to say that Robert and Lizzie were in the prime of their lives. Like all of their other children, the new baby was born at home in the farmhouse built by Robert's father, Anderson Scott, in the 1850s. The house, which still stands today, was large enough for Henderson's family, plus a series of boarders, mostly school teachers. Robert and Lizzie were delighted to have a new baby, but Agnes Scott, age 4 at the time, was not so sure. Agnes, a pretty child with curly dark hair, was enjoying her position as the baby of the house, and she was not pleased to be displaced. Much later in life, Agnes revealed that after the delivery, when the doctor got ready to leave, she insisted he take the baby with him. Robert and Lizzie decided to name the child Anderson Hughes Scott after Lizzie's uncle, the Reverend Anderson Green Hughes. The Scott family experienced a terrible blow in 1914 when Lizzie passed away after surgery at Rex Hospital in Raleigh. Robert was busy with his career, and he had always relied on Lizzie to care for the family and to manage the farm during his many absences. During the unsettled period following Lizzie's death, the youngest children went to stay with various relatives. Anderson and Agnes stayed with Lizzie's family. Elizabeth, who was 12 at the time, went to stay with her sister Josephine, who was raising her own family in Raleigh. A great sense of relief was felt by the family when Robert's sister Mamie White Scott, an unmarried schoolteacher, volunteered to return home and care for the children. A year and a half after Lizzie's death, Robert married Ella Anderson. Miss Ella, as she was called, was a friend of the family who had taught many of the Scott children. A farm is a busy place to grow up with plenty of chores to go around. Young Anderson was expected to do his share. When he balked at being ordered about by his many brothers and sisters, they would tease him and call him Jim. This was meant to annoy the boy, as the real Jim was a farmhand known for his laziness and lack of ambition. Despite the fact that Jim would grow into an industrious adult who embarked on several careers and numerous civic activities, the name would stay with him for the rest of his life. As did many of his brothers and sisters, Jim attended the Hawfield School and then the Alexander Wilson High School. One of his classmates was Josephine Kimry, a beautiful and talented musician. Jim and Joe dated for a number of years, but appeared to part when Jim went off to state in Raleigh to study dairy manufacturing. Joe moved to Greensboro to study piano and organ at Guilford College. Jim was a cut-up and a prankster. One time, he and his college roommate decided to take a bushel of peaches and turn them into spirits in the bathtub. The scheme went well until after the product was bottled. One by one, the bottles exploded, bringing an end to this ill-fated enterprise. The Scott and Kimry families expected Jim and Joe to get married after graduation, so it came as a surprise when the couple admitted that they were, in fact, already married. They had eloped the summer before their senior year in college. When Jim's father, Robert, died in 1929, he left Jim less than $2,000 to give him a start in life. It was very fortunate for Jim that his brothers Ralph and Henry had decided to start a dairy business on Henry's farm. When Jim graduated from college, he went to work at the new business, which was named Melville Dairy, after Robert and Lizzie's farm. In 1935, Melville Dairy moved from Henry's farm to a new facility in downtown Burlington. Jim became the plant manager. By 1940, Jim and Joe had 2 children, Calvin Hughes Scott and Charles Kimry Scott. In 1948, they added a little girl, Martha Elizabeth, to their family. During the war, gasoline was so hard to come by. The Scotts moved into an apartment in Burlington where Jim could walk to work. Dr. Charles Scott recalled that his father had to work double shifts at the dairy during that time. In 1947, Jim's sister Margaret and her husband sold their dairy farm to Melville Dairy. The business was renamed Smith Melville Dairy, and Jim was asked to manage it. Jim accepted the offer, and he and Joe moved their family into a house outside of Raleigh. They would live there for the next 5 years. During this time, the Scotts joined a brand new church, Western Boulevard Presbyterian. Jim became a deacon, and Joe became the organist and choir director. Jim had many connections in Raleigh at this time. Two of his sisters, Josephine and Margaret, both lived there with their families. Also, his brother Carr, who had been the North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture from 1937 to 1948, decided to run for governor. The campaign was successful, and Carr was sworn into office in January of 1949. Another brother, Ralph Scott, was elected to the North Carolina House in 1950. Jim was proud of his brothers, but not overly awed by them. After all, he had known them long before they were famous. The 1950s brought much change to Jim and Joe. Smith Melville Dairy was sold to Long Meadow Dairies, and the family moved back into the home place built by Jim's grandfather. Miss Mamie and Miss Ella passed away. Charles Scott, now a teenager, went off to Woodbury Forest School in Virginia. His cousin Sam was already a student there, and both boys needed a rigorous education to prepare them for college and then medical school. Jim started a new career as the owner and manager of Alamance Frozen Foods, a business started a few years before by his brothers Ralph and Floyd. He would go on to expand the business to produce hickory smoked hams and bacon. Jo resumed her position as organist and choir director at Hawfield's Presbyterian Church. She would practice on Saturday nights, a fact not unknown in the area. People would drive over to the church and park in the lot in order to hear her play. Jo loved church music, but she also had a flair for teaching as well. Dr. Charles Scott recalls that during this time, the school bus would drop off a group of students at their house every afternoon. Jo would give each one a piano lesson while the others waited quietly for their turn. Jim resumed his membership in many local civic organizations such as the Elks, the Chamber of Commerce, the YMCA, the Century Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Exchange Club, and the Sudan Temple of Shriners. Jim assumed a big responsibility at Hawfield's Presbyterian Church as chairman of the committee that guided the construction of the new educational building. For this 10-year-long effort, he received a commemorative plaque, complete with his own personal gold key to the building. The 1960s were a busy time for the Scott family. Son Charles graduated from college at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and enrolled in the medical school of that university. He and his fiancée, Sandra Smith, were married while he was still a medical student. After graduation, Dr. Charles began a series of residencies that would prepare him for a career in pediatric medicine. Daughter Martha graduated from Vardell Hall. She became engaged to Stephen Randolph Madden, and they were married at Hawfield's Presbyterian Church. In the late 1960s, Jim decided to sell the Alamance frozen food business, and he embarked on a new career. Jim went back to school and trained to be a sanitarian for Alamance County. He would be involved in public health for the next decade. When the federal surplus food distribution program began in the 1970s, Jim was selected to be the commodity supervisor for Alamance County. His years in food manufacturing and public health made him the perfect choice. Also during this time, he served on the Alamance County Planning Board and was elected twice to a local school board. One of Jim's favorite activities was to help out with the local soup kitchen. As you can see from this newspaper article, he would drive around to the grocery stores in Burlington, collecting food for the soup kitchen in his old station wagon. His pet dog Johnny came along for the ride, later joined by Bantam Hen, a chicken that roosted under the front seat. When most people would be thinking of retirement, Jim embarked on yet another career. He became the sergeant-at-arms for the State House in Raleigh, and served in this position until he turned 70. Of course, Jim was no stranger to Raleigh. He enjoyed greeting his friends and watching the hustle and bustle of North Carolina's political life unfold within the chamber. As Jim and Joe settled into retirement, they looked to the future as well as the past. In 1982, Jim, his son Dr. Charles, and grandson Andy traveled to the campus of Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. The purpose for this trip was to donate a family Bible to the library. Recorded within the pages of this Bible was the birth record of an ancestor, William Graham, who was the third rector of this school. Mr. Graham served from 1782 to 1796. At that time, the school was known as Liberty Hall Academy. Joe passed away in 1984 after several months of declining health. She was laid to rest at Hawfields Presbyterian Church alongside Jim and Joe's first child, Calvin Hughes Scott, who died in 1947. Jim appreciated the support of his family during this difficult time. He tried to stay active, and he especially enjoyed the Scott family reunions, some of which took place at his home. In 1988, the Scott and Jeffrey families gathered for the wedding of Jim Scott and Jessie Mae Jeffrey, a widow from Burlington, North Carolina. The ceremony was followed by a reception, complete with a beautiful wedding cake. Jim, of course, would not have told you this himself, but his many contributions to his community did not go unnoticed. In April of 1992, the year before he died, he was awarded the first ever Jim Scott Award by the Allied Churches of Alamance County for his service to the Good Shepherd Community Kitchen. A letter written by Roger Dixon, a member of Martin's Chapel Baptist Church, sums up Jim's thoughtfulness and generosity.
Jim was a God-sent man, giving and serving of others, whether it be the Board of Education, his civic duties, or the church. One of his good deeds for us in the Pleasant Grove community and Martin's Chapel Church was the giving of his late wife's organ to the church. As Jim and his family sat during the service and the dedication and playing of the organ, it became a warm and touching moment in the church and our lives at Martin's Chapel. I know the people in the Hawfields community miss Jim as much as we do here in Pleasant Grove.